Good morning. I'm Charles Stewart. I'm the co-director of the Caltech MIT Voting Technology Project and a professor here at MIT. And I'd like to welcome everybody to the Election Audit Summit, which is more formally called the Multidisciplinary Conference on Election Auditing. I'm welcoming folks on behalf of the organizing committee, which consists of myself, and then Mike Alvarez, who's over here, and Jennifer Morrell, who's here, Ron Rivest, and Philip Stark, who are over here. And we will have opportunities to hear from them, so I won't introduce them currently. We have a program that I hope that you all will find interesting. We've gathered on to participate in the program. Actually, the AV folks are looking around, so we're good. Okay. We've gathered a group of people to participate in the program in the audience, and we hope that the audience will help to produce a vigorous discussion and a debate about the issues that we're going to talk about over the next day and a half. I just want to say a few words of introduction to the conference, and then we'll jump right into the first panel. The idea behind this conference was born in the days following the 2016 presidential election. Y'all will remember that one. You know, we often forget that on the morning after that election, leaving aside the substantive outcomes, which I know some people are still digesting, many academics and journalists who follow election administration closely, plus election officials themselves, breathed a sigh of relief on the next morning. I even remember being on a conference call the next day in which some said it was the most well-administered election that they could think of in the post-Hava era. Even so, there were also clouds hanging over that election, and those clouds, which have grown over time, are among the things that bring us to this conference today. Of course, the best known of these clouds hanging over the 2016 election concerned cyber attacks of various sorts that targeted the election. But in mid to late November of 2016, those attacks were not the main story or the principal story, and certainly were not the story they were to become. Instead, vote tabulation was in the news, you'll recall. Especially this group will recall that. So exactly 2 years ago tomorrow, the Pew Charitable Trust sponsored the last of its large post-election confabs. The hall talk at that conference was dominated by challenges to the integrity of the vote count in certain battleground states. And y'all will recall that Green Party candidate and local resident, Jill Stein, questioned whether computer-based tabulation systems could be trusted. She forced recounts in 3 battleground states, and 2 years ago today, we were in the middle of them. Public opinion evidence suggested at the time that a large fraction of Americans, certainly not a majority, but still a substantial fraction, agreed with Stein's skepticism about computer-based voting and vote counting. It was in the midst of the recounts that many Americans first came into contact with arguments being made by members of the scientific and engineering communities about things like verified election systems and post-election audits. It was clear to me at the time and to others that the issue of verifying election outcomes was only going to intensify in the coming years. It was also clear at the time that there was a communications gap between election administration community on the one hand and the scientific engineering community on the other about issues such as verifiability and auditing. And it seemed that the Caltech MIT Voting Technology Project, which now has 2 decades of experience in convenings, had a role to play in helping to bridge the gaps that exist in this space, to encourage a dialogue and try to find a way forward in this important area. So the idea for this conference was formed, and quite frankly, by the way, if the budgeting impasses in Washington hadn't occurred over the last year, we would have had this conference a year ago, but better late than never. So events since 2016 have made it even clearer that the nation needs more sophisticated, efficient, and effective means to audit the outcomes of elections. It also needs more sophisticated, efficient, and effective means to audit the various inputs into election administration. And certainly as politics has become more polarized and elections in more and more states are being determined by narrow margins, the fog of war that surrounds election administration has become more obvious to the public. The need to assure candidates and the public that the right winners are declared continues to grow. Furthermore, since the 2016 election, the nation has been fed a steady diet of news stories that highlight errors that can arise in the preparation of elections. Consider the 4 cases very, very quickly. First case, As the extent of cyber attacks leveled at the election system became better understood, we learned of actual intrusions into at least one state's voter registration database in 2016, and learned that a major commercial voter registration system vendor had been subject to a phishing attack. This news and case raised concerns that American elections might be tampered with, not only by flipping votes, but perhaps by sabotaging voter registration. Second case, related to it, these attacks were on the minds of many people this past June, when it was discovered that 118,000 registered voters had been left off voter registration lists in Los Angeles County during the California primary. In the end, it appears that the problem stemmed from a file format change that interfered with the data exchange between state and county. Nonetheless, whatever the cause of that problem, the episode also underscored the importance of ensuring the accuracy of voting lists. Third case, from 2017 in Virginia and their state election. It turned out that 26 registered Democrats had been assigned to the wrong state legislative district and been given the wrong ballots in that election. It was a district in which the election was decided by 10 votes, and that election itself could have very well affected the partisan control of the state legislature. This state highlighted the sometimes fraught process of assigning voters to legislative districts and making sure that voters get the right ballots. And then finally, the fourth case, my home state of Florida, in 2018, where Broward County reminded us yet again that an undetected error in ballot design could lead to voters effectively being disenfranchised. So, all these episodes together suggest that American elections are being run under conditions of more exacting tolerances, and that the larger election administration community, and I mean people represented in this room, the public, administrators, academia, we have a lot of work to do as we attempt to conduct election under these exacting tolerances. So the agenda for the next day and a half is related to the sorts of issues that I just addressed, and let me just say a word about the agenda, and then we'll jump into it. The agenda has been organized around three substantive themes and a social goal. The first substantive theme is to highlight a very important method of election verification that's getting a lot of attention these days, and that, by which I mean risk-limiting audits. In addition to some general comments this morning, this afternoon will be devoted almost entirely to risk-limiting audits. We'll start the afternoon off with a panel about Colorado. It'll be all Colorado all the time as we learn about their experience as they've embraced RLAs completely. We'll end the afternoon with a panel that attempts to look beyond Colorado and technological, legal, other sorts of extensions that need to happen to make this a go. In the middle of the afternoon, Philip has developed a simulation to help to educate us all into the values of RLAs and random sampling and auditing. So that's one important theme, RLAs. Second substantive theme is to place post-election auditing in a broader context of election auditing overall. So this morning, for instance, we're going to start off with a couple of panels that set the stage. The first one will definitely set the stage with some legal background about RLAs, et cetera. The second panel this morning will touch on some extensions of RLAs, and then broaden the horizons a bit into election forensics and into the international scene. In addition, tomorrow morning we'll discuss other methods of auditing that go beyond vote counting, such as GIS auditing and voter list auditing and those sorts of issues. And so we're going to be talking about auditing in a space beyond RLA and the current place where RLA is. For the third theme, we've borrowed the title from Heather Gerken, the dean of the law school at Yale, who likes to talk about getting from here to there. In the context of this conference, how do we get to a world in which election audits and quality assurance are integrated more thoroughly into elections? What sort of laws need to be passed? What do those laws need to look like? What types of technology and software need to be developed? What intellectual puzzles need to be solved by academics and others? So the last panel tomorrow will touch on these topics, but I also hope that as we engage in the substance of the other panels, that we talk about these here to there issues, so that we can actually move some of these ideas into practice. And then finally, I mentioned a social goal. We want people to talk and network. We've designed the agenda so that there's downtime between the panels, opportunities to talk. We'll have an informal dinner tonight. We hope everybody will come and talk, exchange cards, debate the issues, talk about how to make things happen. And so we have plenty of time for people to get to know each other. And we hope that this opportunity to do cross-fertilization will be taken advantage of by the folks here. Some final logistics before we get going. There are some restrooms around the corner. I think some of y'all have found those, first thing. We'll have breaks and things out in the hallway if you get tired of our vittles. There is a cafe downstairs that some of y'all may have seen, so feel free to, if you really want to rub shoulders with business students, feel free to wander down there. After the morning session, we're going to be moving to a new place toward the center of campus, and we'll get instructions after the very last panel, and I think there are maps in the folders as well. There will be guides and expedition leaders for people who want to be led over there at the time. So don't worry, we'll get you over there, but just be aware that we'll have lunch here, and then we'll move over there for the afternoon. I wanted to point out the folks related to the MIT Election Data and Science Lab who are really the folks who are making this possible. Claire is over here. She can raise her hand. Y'all have, is anybody here else in the room with MedSol? Or is everybody else? There's Cameron Wimpy, our research director. Y'all encountered our research, some of our research staff when you checked in. Feel free to grab them and ask them about kind of logistics and about MIT and how to get around. They're here to be your guides. And then finally, I just want to make a brief note about the sponsors. As I mentioned, MedSol is helping to make this all run and to support this. And we are supported by Hewlett and by Democracy Fund. Democracy Fund itself is helping to pay for dinner tonight. In fact, it is paying for dinner tonight. And we're not just helping, they are. And so, right? Yeah, all right. So, I have been assured that one day we will get a check from the National Science Foundation. Like I said, budget impasses and all those sorts of things. So we thank everybody for their support of the conference and the excitement that people have expressed to me about it. Why don't we get going? So I'll invite the first panel to come on up, and once they get settled, we will get underway.